perfect. Well, good evening, everybody. It is 9 o'clock at night on this first day of CypherCon here in Wisconsin. You know, I think the last time a British person was famous in talking about Wisconsin, it was in that television/movie called Love Actually. And there was rather embarrassing scenes about a British guy. So if that's your view on British people in Wisconsin, please do not hold it against me. I am Phillip Miller. And I have that obligatory slide that tells you all about me, but a few things that are perhaps relevant. I have been a Chief Information Security Officer for a good chunk of my professional career, but don't hold that too much against me. I'm also a farmer. And I've farmed in the great state of Kansas, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Commonwealth of Virginia, where my wife, who's sitting in the front row, and I run our family farm. The rest of the stuff is actually true, but not terribly exciting. But I will point out that from the perspective of cybersecurity and farming, I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn drawing parallels between the life of a farmer and somebody who is an operational person in cybersecurity. And I'm bringing some of those lessons here today. And I'm also talking about a very important thing. For the first time ever, on this stage, we're revealing my first book. So if you have never heard about this book, that's because this is the first time it's been mentioned. We weren't quite sure if it would hit publication before here, but it is. So it's available for pre-order on Barnes & Noble's website. If you want a really super special edition that's going to be in hardcover, you can connect with my wife and she'll figure out how to get you a hardcover copy that I'll sign. But if you want an early copy in paperback, it is available on barnesandnoble.com. So if you like what I say tonight, lots more of it in the book. Agriculture's everywhere. Anybody recognize this? This is the Starbucks on the other side of the street in the basement of the Hilton Hotel. And coffee and agriculture, this is the theme. People are very disconnected from the world of agriculture today, unless you happen to be somebody who grew up on a farm, still has a farming family, or have chosen that as part of your career. You can go throughout your entire day or week without really ever having that connection to what it means to be an agriculturalist. And yet for cybersecurity professionals, the need to get involved in agriculture, particularly from a protection perspective, is as critical now as it was for people to start working on mechanized tractors and modern machinery in the early parts of the 1900s. We're in Wisconsin, so I would be very remiss if I didn't note that you are the #1 state in the nation for cheese. And lots of dairy farms. And the dairy industry is another industry where mechanization and technology have really been taking an uptick in recent years. If you don't know anything about the dairy industry, it is highly automated now. So many cows have an ear tag, and that ear tag has an RFID sensor in it. When the cow goes into the milking parlor, they're met by a robot that reads the tag, identifies which particular cow it is, and then there's the thing called a cluster, which comes up underneath the udders of the cow, and it adjusts that cluster to the exact right position of her udder, and then joins it on and completes her milking cycle. And it keeps track in the computer system of everything about that cow, how much milk she produced, and in the advanced systems, it will now adjust her rations of food for the day. These computer systems that run these robotic milking machines are installed by companies that know a lot about robots and milking, but not very much about cybersecurity. A researcher in the Netherlands, where most of these robotic milking machines came from, recently did a study of a number of dairies. None of them had had a system update on the open Linux kernels that are used in these robotics. Hundreds of vulnerabilities, and quite often these systems are connected on like home Wi-Fi routers to the internet. So We hope, right, that our industry partners that are developing these systems are thinking about cybersecurity, but hope is not a plan. And we know very much from history that adoption of technology, particularly computerized technology, internet-connected technology, has a tendency to get ahead of itself in terms of adoption and lagging in terms of cybersecurity protection. So agriculture, what is it? At its heart, it's about producing raw food from scratch. And so if you were a kid in a science class, right, you probably had your first taste of agriculture, taking a seed of a pea or a bean and putting it inside some cotton wool and in a little mason jar or something and putting a little bit of water in it and watching it sprout. Really, agriculture is just that scaled up. If it's plant-based agriculture, that's what we're talking about. And then, of course, most of the plant-based agriculture is used to grow grains that feed livestock that we then eat in the form of chicken or turkey or pork or beef, etc. So agriculture sustains us as humans. Without agriculture, we would be hunters and gatherers, right? So agriculture is the mainstay of civilization. The other mainstay of civilization is policy. My book focuses predominantly on policy. And like the previous speaker who was talking about incident response planning, which is what you do when policy goes wrong, policy is about getting it right up front. Unfortunately, most enterprises do not understand the concept of information security or cybersecurity policy. They think it's a set of rules. It's almost like if you went back to your school days and your elementary school teacher said, all right, class, we are going to have a beautiful learning experience. You're not allowed to run in the hallway. You must raise your hand when you want to speak. And they come up with this list of things, and they say, these are the classroom rules. But somehow we get into an enterprise, and we repeat the same set of list of things, and then we say, this is our information security policy. And what happens if you break that information security policy? You're out of here. You may be terminated, disciplined for breaking a policy. But that's not what policy really is supposed to be. At its core, policy is about directionality. Executive leaders, business owners, their officers should set policy so that people know how they should behave, not what they must do specifically in a given situation. Policy is supposed to empower people to make good decisions. Policy is enabling you to deal with the unknown, not the known. So, business owners who create policy, good policy, end up with a situation where their business grows and thrives, like a farmer who understands what their field is capable of producing and not capable of producing, plants the right seeds in the right location, provides the right nutrients, the right amount of water. They have a great harvest. Bad policy leads to failure fast. You know, we think about agile computing policies, right? We want to fail fast, but you don't want to fail fast when your policy is a cybersecurity policy and people have no idea what they should do when they're creating something new. Because if they don't know what to do when creating something new, they will default to the path of least resistance, the path of no security, the path of I don't care because nobody's telling me that I should care. They don't know how to think and act as owners, and owners don't know how to tell their team members how to think and act like them because they delegated policy to somebody who then created a set of rules. So poor policy isn't as bad as bad policy because it just leads to a very slow trickle failure. Think of an irrigation pumping system that's running on half power. Yes, your fields still get water, but your yield is much lower. I use agriculture as metaphors. This started several years back when I was working at Brooks Brothers, the clothing company. And I was having a really hard time getting the executive team to pay attention to information security awareness. You know, it didn't matter how many posters I put up, how many emails I sent out, how many 5-second conversations I would have in the elevator, nothing seemed to resonate. One day, our chief operating officer stopped me and said, "Philip, that story you wrote on LinkedIn about your pigs," he said, "that was amazing. I had no idea." He said, "You should write more of those articles." And so I thought, okay, maybe I could use some of these stories about my life on the farm to introduce some information security principles. So I did that in my next article, and then I bump into the CEO in the elevator. He said, "Philip, that was really interesting. I didn't know that you raised cows. And that stuff that you were telling us about security in there, I'd never heard that before." I said, "Well, thank you." He said, "I'm going to tell the rest of the executive team to start paying attention to your LinkedIn posts. They're far more interesting than your emails." Now, of course, he didn't want me to stop doing the important work of protecting the enterprise. He didn't want me to stop the formal communications, but these very consumable agricultural metaphors really helped communicate at a different level to a different audience. And so I found out that you can use this with pretty much any team. There are parallels for marketing, for the legal team. And so I don't spend all of my time in the office talking about agriculture, but I do weave it in. And I think I figured out why it works. If you think back to other famous books in history, such as the Bible, right? There's lots and lots of parallels to agriculture because fundamentally this is our life, right? Again, food is the lifeblood that feeds us. And instinctively, we all understand some of the very basics of raising animals. You know, maybe you have a pet, right? So you might not quite understand the intricacies of raising a herd of beef cattle, but you do understand that animals need to eat on a cycle, that they produce certain things out of the back end that have to be got rid of, right? So you start talking about those things to people, they understand it. So how do I bring that farmer's mindset to the office? And you'll notice, if you're familiar at all with Amazon, where I worked for a little while, they have these things called leadership principles. And so I've related here some of the Amazon leadership principles to the work that I do as a farmer and trying to bring that into the office setting. And if you take any of these, and of course, feel free to take photographs or whatever of the slides. If you take any of these to heart, you start realizing that whether you're in agriculture or any other hobby that you have, there are many things here that ring true. My favorite is that wisdom beats experience any day. We all know people who have 20, 30 years of experience in a particular role, but they don't necessarily have the wisdom to determine when to apply their knowledge and when not to apply. That's where great leadership comes into place, but it's also where really good policy comes into place. Because if people understand the intention behind leadership, if leaders understand that their intention is crafted into well-written policy, then that person with the experience can then start to apply some wisdom. There was this really popular set of wrist bracelets about 15 years ago. They had WWJD on them, right? What would Jesus do? And people use that as a way to remind themselves that there is a set of decision-making criteria that they could apply to their life. That is how business policy should be. So if you're in a position where you're leading other people and you have to make decisions about how do you want to set a trajectory for the work that they're doing, think in terms of how can they understand what you intend them to do, leadership intent, and put that in your policy statements and sort of back off on the regulatory side of things. Leave that for compliance frameworks, for standards, and those kinds of things. Another one of these that I really like is the last one. Don't cultivate all the fields. The mice need somewhere to live. In reality, we have this sort of mindset in cybersecurity that we have to catch everything. Every single thing needs to be eradicated. We have to have, pristine, clean fields. But if you spend too much time focusing on the edge of your field, it slows you down. You need to focus on the parts of your fields where you can easily navigate, where you can get the highest yield for the least amount of effort expended, least amount of diesel fuel too, if you're driving a big tractor. And when you're thinking about applying cybersecurity policy, not everything at the edge is the biggest risk out there. You can allow some parts of the edge to be unmanaged. You can allow some parts of the edge to even get infested with mice. As long as you keep the pieces that matter clear. Don't let weeds get into the main part of your field, right? That will lower your production. But do think about, what is that perimeter, the edge of your field? And if some of that has to be a little bit messy, that's okay. Agriculture and cybersecurity share a lot of common risks, but I want to bring some of these home to this group of individuals. First and foremost, drones, aerial vehicles, etc. Did you know that 90% of these that are in use in agriculture today are Chinese made? That CISO and the FBI sent out a warning just 2 months ago about the risks of nobody in American agriculture spent any time at all trying to investigate the safety and security of these devices, that almost all of them transmit data over the cloud to Chinese hosted servers, and nobody's inspecting that information, that these drones are flying over farmers' fields that are right on the edge of military installations. We as cybersecurity professionals understand those sorts of risks. Your typical farmer who is working with an agricultural provider and says, how can I optimize my yield? And they say, well, we've got this great new little tool, and if you connect it up to your computer and you hit the go button on it, it'll fly around your fields, and it's going to give you information that will help you understand how to plant better. And don't worry, if it breaks, we'll come out and we'll fix it for you, right? And it's only $79.99 a month. That type of investment seems rational to a farmer trying to optimize their yield. They don't think or care about where the data is going, how it's getting to them. Heck, they might not even care about the user ID and password that they're using for it. And yet, at some point, we are going to see happening in the agricultural industry the same as has happened in every other industry that starts to adopt technology with weak passwords, weak encryption, weak control over the data, that there is a compromise. And then people start asking, well, how did this come to be? So for those of us that sit on the cybersecurity side of the house, we should be thinking about this, right? Trying to influence policy. If you have friends who are in agriculture, pay attention, right, to what they're doing. If there's a chapter of a organization that you participate in, see if you can extend some of your help to your local Farm Bureau agency to start educating people about some of these sorts of risks and the things that you know from your world that could help them. The Internet of Things. Almost all of us have some kind of IoT devices in our house. It may be a connected speaker, could be a doorbell, right? Farmers choose the same technology for their homes, but they are also increasingly using it in their barns. Surveillance cameras to keep track of their cows in the barn. Same kind of problems apply. Data is going, we don't know where. People aren't managing it, weak passwords, right? The story goes on. Operational technology and industrial control systems, these are controlling the water systems, irrigation. A lot of farmers even have sewage treatment on their big installations, especially those that are dealing with large cattle operations. These systems are legacy in many cases, systems that have now been upgraded with some level of computer control, often with cellular technology connecting into them. They're not on private networks. People haven't spent a lot of time as the hacking community trying to figure out what they can get into and what they can't, because the easier target right now is the municipal water supply, right? And we see issues with them, pipelines, and all of the other smaller utility companies feeling the pressure of data breaches. But those companies have resources to attack the problem head on. Your independent farmer who may or may not have anybody on their staff that knows anything about technology is adopting this stuff to handle the reduction in availability of labor. They're turning it on, and they don't know what the ramifications are going to be. And then there's the more mundane stuff that we deal with in our regular business lives, right? Sales software, marketing communication, social media, all of these things that we know how to protect in regular business are increasingly becoming things that farming communities need to protect. And they're doing this in a way that is probably very insecure, and in a way that there's not much accessible service help for them, right? There's managed security service providers out there. There are small regional IT shops out there. But for the most part, those individuals are not reaching out into the farming communities because they are much more dispersed, much more isolated. And then supply chain attacks, software vulnerabilities that affect every system out there are affecting the agricultural systems, which again lack far behind the rest of the industry in terms of updates, because the companies that are producing this technology, very small shops, maybe 5, maybe 10, 15 developers in a lot of cases. This is not technology that is being generated by large enterprises with massive product security teams. There may be one person who's, trying to do the best they can. And these products don't have high sales margins, right? A lot of the time it's about the physical equipment that is being sold, and the circuit board and the IoT type system on it is really just very minor in the cost equation. So again, if you have an opportunity or an interest in getting involved, see what is available in your local community, or I don't know if there's any Discord channels in Wisconsin for agricultural people, but if there are, that would be a great place to maybe find like minds. So why is it so important? Why am I up here pleading for people to pay attention, right? 90% of our food supply in this country comes from the United States. Now that's a great thing, right? Locally produced. Other than the USA, the only major exporters of grains are China and Russia. India and Brazil, the next group down, produce mostly for their own domestic markets. So if our supply chain is severely disrupted, we're going to be forced to bring in food from China and Russia. Geopolitically, I think you could see how that might be a problem. From a choice perspective in our food buying habits, it would be even more problematic. Which brings me to this quote. Show me a nation that cannot feed itself, and I'll show you a nation in chaos. This harkens back to issues from about 45 years prior to this, when Marshall was talking about the importance of food security in recovering from conflict. Almost every country that is going through some kind of conflict either was preceded by or succeeded by a crisis relating to the food supply. And so if we don't pay attention to our agricultural food supply, and we don't pay attention to the cybersecurity risks that could diminish our agricultural food supply, we will be in a position of regret. Those are not the only risks affecting agriculture. It's not just about cybersecurity. And I find also that when I focus on these agricultural risks and apply them to broader business context, I have a way of connecting with other senior executive leaders. Everybody can understand, especially after COVID, what biological impacts do, right? We understand a pandemic, epidemics, those things affect the supply chain, right? We'll hear about bovine viruses, we hear about swine flu, we hear about avian flu taking out chicken supplies, egg prices going up, right? All of these things people are now starting to understand, and we can use those as parallels when we're talking about other parts of our business. So if you're a software developer and you're trying to explain to your leadership exactly what's all this supply chain security concerns, you can start talking to them, well, do you remember when this happened in the news to do with egg prices? That was caused by disruption in the supply chain. And we're talking about those same kind of things, but yes, it's a code library, but you don't really need to worry about the underlying details. Just understand that there's these ripple effects that take place. Climate. Yes, we have macro issues of climate change that hit the headlines, but I'm more thinking about the ability for local areas to better manage the climate conditions that they face today. This was not an issue 30, 40 years ago. The reason it wasn't an issue 30, 40 years ago is because the American agricultural industry was far more diverse. By that, I mean, you could go to any state and you'd find a collection of different cereal grains being grown. You would find a concentration in different parts of your state of dairy, of animal agriculture, but you don't see that so much now. Corn and soy and wheat are the main commodities. You can look state by state at the map, right? Yeah, every state's got a little bit of each, but Kansas, right, absolutely dominant in wheat. We talk about the Corn Belt, right? We just talked about Wisconsin here. Absolutely dominant in the dairy industry, particularly cheese supply. 25%, I think, of the nation's specialty cheeses come out of Wisconsin. So now a climate issue, whether it's hailstorms or a late frost in Florida, right, it now affects the whole food supply in ways that it didn't affect things before. We can again use this parallel in terms of understanding the impact to cybersecurity of having a very limited supply choice in terms of technology. Yeah, we've got Linux. Yes, we've got Windows. Do we really have that much else in the way of options for enterprise operating systems? Not really, right? And so we've made decisions for efficiency that have constrained our choice. And in that constraining of choice, we've created new risks for ourselves. We talked about supply chain disruption, but in the area of business, we see some of that in what just happened in Baltimore. We lose a very critical portion of our nation's infrastructure, and now we don't know what to do. Relate that to internet, your company's internet supply. Okay, do I have 2 internet connections coming into my data center? Is that enough now? Is it as resilient as it should be? You can use these types of situations that are occurring in the broader market to provoke those conversations with the executive team that you've maybe been struggling to get their mind share on. Pick one more on this thing, financial stability. We've seen the stress that companies have put themselves into in the last 24 months with inflation and with the reduction in ability to borrow money and the contraction in investment for startup companies. These things have led to some pretty catastrophic issues in our industry, massive layoffs in the tech industry. Those ripple effects are now going to take several years to run through. This is not like the dot-com bust of the early 2000s. This is a fundamental shift in how people have made decisions around technology. They've actually decided to trade, in many cases, projects that were in flight based on real customer demand to replace them with artificial intelligence products that actually have no known customer demand. They're trying to generate demand based off of, in many cases, hype. Now, there are real things in AI that are useful, but for companies that have found themselves under constrained pressure, if you read their filings, public filings, you'll see an awful lot of hope in their commentary around what they're doing with artificial intelligence. We expect that customers may do this, followed up by, of course, about leading statements not actually having any credibility, etc. So think about that carefully when you're looking at the projects that your company's doing. If they are making a pivot into artificial intelligence and you're in the security space, how can you use some of these sorts of lessons to be a little bit of a wise sage for your company and leading them down this path of, all that glitters is not gold, right? So we must talk about artificial intelligence. It's a conference, cybersecurity conference. If we don't talk about artificial intelligence, nobody's going to pay any attention. So we're going to have a little bit of a diversion here. Still talking about farming, but we're going to talk about AI. A tractor and a Tesla Model 3. These are approximately to the same scale, give or take a quarter of an inch. If the tractor is an autonomous tractor and the Tesla Model 3 is an autonomous Tesla Model 3 and they're both driving down the same road, how do we feel about it? Most people don't have a tremendous amount of concern, given that the road conditions are good. If the Tesla goes out the back of the tractor, its airbags are going to go off. The farmer will probably be okay. He's got roll bars, all that kind of stuff. Scale matters. Size matters. So do road conditions, right? Tractors driving on a country road go very slow. This tractor can do maybe 20 miles an hour. It happens to be my tractor, one of my tractors. And the roads that I drive it on don't have any road markings. If you go off in the ditch, you better hope you're in the tractor, not in the Tesla. If you try to pass my tractor in your Tesla because your Tesla's programming says, slow-moving vehicle, I think I can go around, you're pretty likely to hit a logging truck coming in the other direction that the Tesla didn't see because it can't see over a hill. But people are marching forward, embedding software code into autonomous driving vehicles based off of normal conditions. And they're not putting enough attention into what the abnormal situations might look like. But let's scale it up a little bit. This is the kind of tractor that most row crop farmers use. Now, I didn't put any extra add-ons on it, so we'll just say that this is going from one field to another and is going to hitch up to a planter at the other end. If you're that Tesla driver, how do you feel about your odds now? You're not very lucky if you have a hit with that tractor. Maybe we're a little more concerned now about autonomous driving when we encounter a vehicle like that on the road. And yes, they are both legally allowed to be operated on a road that is just a lane and a half wide, right? With very soft verges. Now we're talking. Combine harvester. That boom on that combine harvester is 30 foot long, twice the length of that Tesla Model 3. Yes, you can put those on the road too at the same time. Yes, that John Deere tractor has autonomous driving capabilities. Now, you hope that the farmer hasn't programmed it to think that his field is the road, but you've got no way of knowing. It's relying on GPS data, not GPS data with maps. The farmer's the one who makes the decision about where it's allowed to go, what its boundaries are. And that's going into a computer. And that computer, in the next versions, is going to be enabled via Starlink to communicate to the internet. Now how do we feel? A little less confident? These are decisions that lucky people are working on in companies like John Deere, Case International Harvester, and they're doing their very best to try to envision the situations that could put the tractor and the agricultural machinery in a risky situation and what they can do to prevent it. They're thinking about geofencing so that maybe a farmer can't make a mistake. They're thinking about what happens if that vehicle gets on the road. What happens if it goes rogue? And what can they do in terms of alerting and stopping and all those kinds of things? Are we confident that companies like Tesla are considering the work of these other companies making these giant vehicles? Probably not so much, right? A lot of these folks are sitting out in offices in big metro areas, and they don't understand the world that we live in rural communities. But we can hope. Finally, the big boy. Now, I don't have one of these on my farm. And yes, this is still to scale. So this is the largest Komatsu vehicle that's used in the mining industry. How do you feel about that Tesla on the road at the same time as the Komatsu? Now, this Komatsu is not a road legal vehicle, but they are testing in Arizona right now a fully autonomous version of this vehicle. Now, it's constrained to a particular mine. What happens if somebody gets control of that? Right? If somebody figures out a way to turn that into their little radio-controlled toy that they're going to control from some other part of the world, and they decide that they want it on the road, we don't have much technology that can stop that if it's on a US highway. Just think about those consequences, right? When somebody says to you, these things can't happen, as critical thinkers in the cybersecurity industry, our job is to say, well, yeah, it could happen. And our job is to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to consider the ramifications and how to stop it happening. Because these extreme situations can easily be used as examples for the more mundane. How can we use this kind of illustration to help an executive understand that you can't just go, on a hope and a prayer decision with the latest software release? Because somebody somewhere has ill intention. And we are the defenders of that system to overcome the ill intention. The answer to all of this is what I talked about at the beginning. It's about policy. Policy always comes first. If you get leadership intent clearly articulated in a policy, then everybody on the team can understand, if given a situation that I've never encountered before, what direction is most likely to be the one that my leadership would want. Because if you go to leadership and ask them to make all of the decisions every single time, you'll either get no decision, or they will pick the decision that best fits the narrative that they're looking for, but we're professionals. We're the experts in cybersecurity. We need to know how to apply our expertise to net new situations. And we do that best if we are guided by clear policy. Following rapidly behind policy has to be the structure of the team. So as a CISO, coming into an organization, the first thing I want to know is, what does my leadership expect of me? The second is, can I assemble a team of people that can execute on that policy? If I can do that, then with these 3 Ps of preparation, practice, and proof, I can build an effective team that can deliver against that policy. What do I mean by preparation? It means trying all of those things that I know should be in place, practicing those things to make sure they are actually in place, and then metrics, right? Examinations, pen tests, all of those things to prove that they are really doing those things that I expected them to do. If I can do all of those things, then for the known conditions, what I expect to happen, I can have confidence. Then, if I've got all of those things, now I can start telling the story. I can tell executive team members how our program is doing. If I want to, as a farmer, I can bring in parallels for farming. Our crop yield looks good this year. No, we've got way too many weeds in the field, right? And no matter, if you're not a farmer, there's something in your life you can bring that's authentic to your experience, that comes natural to you, to help you talk to others who aren't part of the cybersecurity world, to help them better understand what it is that you're doing and what your concerns are. Then when we've told the story, we talk about value. This is the toughest thing for cybersecurity teams, is to articulate, where am I adding value into the business? Because we often think of ourselves only as a cost element. I do something to reduce the risk. No, we're all much more than that. But we have to tell the story about how we're increasing the yield. How do better products, more secure products, help a company sell their product to downstream customers? How do more secure credit unions enable them to go seek new customers for a local credit union versus a large national bank? How does a telecom provider tell a better story about their solutions, their services? The smartest ones are talking about privacy. They're talking about the customer journey. They're talking about resilience. They're talking about security. They're talking about these things because the average American consumer is now concerned about them. We're actually getting fed up for the first time in US history with all of the privacy notifications, with all the data breaches. We were just sort of tuning them out for a little bit. But then Colonial Pipeline hit. And people like us all of a sudden found that we couldn't get home from work, right? People were stranded on Interstate 95 in bad weather because there was no petrol to be had for their engines. And from that, we can build a virtuous cycle. We can tell the story. We can show the changes that we need to make to the team, to the policy. We can then repeat those 3 Ps and make a better tomorrow for our companies. If we do that, then we're creating a better world. Pulling it back into farming, where do we need to do this most? We need to do it most in the industrial technology space. We've got great work being done by the big manufacturers, but lots of small producers out there that need help. And they don't have big cybersecurity teams. And they're not learning from other industries, right? So people are gun shy, I think, to a certain extent, right, about moving from a well-established company into a startup, right? So you have lots of ag startups, and people are saying, I don't know if I want to have a cybersecurity job in an agricultural startup where the job description says I'm going to be wearing 20 different hats. But if you have a passion for this and the skills, and you want to do something different, maybe think about it. because it is a place where you can directly impact the future, perhaps in a more meaningful and tangible way than helping people have faster performance on their website for a retailer. The other place where we can all get involved is government policy. These two data points should scare everybody in this room. The sector-specific plan for the food and agricultural industry has not been updated since 2015. So the US government, for almost 10 years, has said, we don't need to change the plans that we're going to use if something really bad happens in those industries. Think of all the things that have happened in the last 10 years, and nothing has been updated in those plans. That's worse than what we experienced during COVID, when we had plans that hadn't been updated for 3 or 4 years, plans that weren't even being followed. FEMA has an interagency plan. This one's a little bit better. Okay, it's only 2019 since they last updated that one, but we're in 2024 now, and there's no sign that they're going to make any changes to it before the next administration comes in. What we do have, finally, is an ISAC community for food and agriculture. Very fledgling, but again, if you have passion, I know those folks over there are looking for people to get involved. And of course, no surprise, the big agricultural players are investing and helping out in that space. So, in conclusion, thank you. I know it's really late, and I know there's some really fun, exciting things going to be happening over at the casino across the street. For those of you watching on video, it's not a real casino. We're going to plan a casino heist of a fictional casino, because that's the kind of thing we do at a CypherCon. But if you'd like to connect with me, I can talk about farming and cybersecurity, large enterprise and small, do various different things. So that's my LinkedIn there. And if you'd like to know more about book publishing, farming, or sewing, you can connect with my wife, who's in the front row there, and that's her LinkedIn. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. And let's go out and grow things together.